What's up, world, and welcome to the All Radio Show. This is where we discuss issues pertaining to the socioeconomic system and how they relate to everything. Why and how are the fundamental questions. Answer them enough, you get to the truth. I'm your host, Alex. My guest today is the author of several books, including No Rich and No Poor, The Populist Goal We Can and Must Win, Divide and Rule, The Left versus Right Trap, The Israeli Ruling Class Exposed. It exposes ordinary Jews as well as Palestinians, and The People as Enemy, the leader's hidden agenda in World War II. He also created and edits NewDemocracyWorld.org and pt.1.org, as well as created and is the administrator on Facebook's Egalitarian Revolution group. Please welcome John Spritzler to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, John, thank you for coming back for the first time. You were my inaugural guest a little over a year ago. It was interesting. I listened to it recently again, and you said a lot of good points and nuggets on it, and I encourage people to listen. I'm actually going to release it a week prior to this show, but yeah, I appreciate you being back with me.
Thank you.
I want to pick up where we left off on last show. We were talking about how a lot of people understand all the problems in society and different issues. And so what would be the next step? That was how we kind of ended. And you made the comment, you'd really like to go over that because you've thought about it a lot and you have a lot of ideas. But I want to go over a couple other things first. And you tirelessly advocate for egalitarianism and an egalitarian society. You've literally spelled out what it means with examples on your website. So why don't you define for me now, what is egalitarianism and what would an egalitarian society look like?
Well, okay. Of course, I'll have to be brief to give a brief answer to a question which has a lot of different aspects that, need to be thought about.
Yes, and that's why I encourage people to go to especially pdrboston.org. That's really where you lay out everything.
That's right. In fact, the website pdrboston.org is basically a huge sort of frequently asked questions kind of website. It's basically a website that attempts to answer all of the questions and concerns that people have when they hear about this idea of having no rich and no poor and real not fake democracy. What does that mean? How will it work? All the excellent questions people have. Every time I've heard someone ask me a question, I thought to myself, well, does this website answer it? And sometimes it does, but often it didn't. And when it did not answer that question, I set about thinking about, well, what's a good answer? And I would write a new page for the website that addresses that question. And that's how the website has grown to include several, a lot of pages and different topics looked at from different angles and so forth. But to answer your question, with a starting point at least, I'll say this. Egalitarianism is about shaping society by the two key egalitarian values.
Okay.
One of those values is what I call no rich and no poor equality. That means it's the notion of equality, which is captured, at least economically, by the egalitarian principle of from each according to reasonable ability, to each according to need or reasonable desire, with scarce things equitably rationed according to need. So that's sort of what no rich and no poor equality is about. Notice that it's not about people being identical.
Right.
The idea of according to need or reasonable desire, well, that means people have different needs and even different reasonable desires. And the idea of according to reasonable ability, Well, people are different. One person's reasonable ability to contribute is different from another's.
Exactly.
So there's nothing about being identical in the concept of no rich and no poor equality. But there's an important point to make also about what no rich and no poor equality does not mean. It does not mean equal opportunity. Just think about what equal opportunity really means. This is a phrase that pro-capitalists like Robert Reich and pro-capitalists for centuries have pushed and used this vocabulary of equal opportunity. Because the reason that they like the phrase is because it has the word equal in it, and they know that to get popular support from the masses, they have to seem, at least, to be about equality.
Exactly.
But the phrase actually is about the opposite of equality, because equal opportunity means an equal opportunity to rise to the top of an unequal society. All this talk about having a level playing field, and people who talk about equal opportunity also always talk about having a level playing field. Well, what's a playing field? A playing field is where people play a game like soccer or football, and what's the essence of a game? By the way, I have nothing against sports, competitive sports played for fun. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But just as a metaphor, let's think about what a level playing field is talking about.
Right.
It
insinuates competition, right?
Yeah, it means having fair competition, and the competition is one that results in one team winning and the other team losing.
Right.
And in the economic aspect of that metaphor, it means one person becoming a winner, meaning rich, like Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos, or the ultimate winners, and the Koch brothers, or however you pronounce it, and other people being the losers, the people who end up broke, and so forth. And having a level playing field is not saying there shouldn't be winners and losers. It's saying that the winners and losers should be determined by a fair competition. For example, Robert Reich famously, and I have an article where I link to his blog post, where he starts off his blog post by saying that he has no objection to the Koch brothers or Koch brothers, however you say it, both of whom were alive at the time. He said he has no objection to them having their multi-billion-dollar fortune because, Reich says, they got it legally, fair and square. The idea is that, they didn't cheat, they didn't get it because of some, special privilege that they got because of being white or whatever. And so therefore it was okay.
Right.
And, this is the kind of thinking which would lead Robert Reich to saying that if press, that maybe even slavery was okay as long as what determined who was a slave and who was a master was some kind of fair determination, not biased against people because of their race, for example. But this is absurd.
Exactly.
And, of course, the capitalists love the phrase equal opportunity because they can use it to sound like they're for equality, but really they're just defending class inequality. So egalitarianism is not about defending class inequality. It's not about making the determination of who's a master and who's a slave, or who's rich and who's poor, somehow, quote, fair. It's about abolishing class inequality so that the society is based on from each according to reasonable ability, to each according to need, or reasonable desire, and so forth. So that's value number one that egalitarians hold and want to shape society by. And now the second value is what I call mutual aid, and which many other people and myself on occasion refer to as solidarity. And it's the idea that people should be helping each other, that's what we should be doing, as opposed to being pitted against each other in order to make us more controllable by a ruling privileged upper class. And so these two values are no rich and no poor equality and mutual aid. People who share those values and who would like society to be shaped by those values Well, 99.99% of those people have never heard the word egalitarian. That's a fact.
Yeah, I actually hadn't either, John. I mean, I had, but I was unfamiliar with it.
Yeah, knowing the word egalitarian, calling himself an egalitarian is nice, but that's not what makes a person an egalitarian. What makes a person an egalitarian is sharing these values, implicitly at least. Many people don't, articulate them explicitly because the ruling class mass media, censors any explicit articulation of these values, and
of course,
and so people are not familiar with the words to do it. But the vast majority of people everywhere on the planet are, in fact, egalitarian. And I'll give an example of how this has become very evident during the COVID-19 epidemic, if you want me to do that.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. It's on everybody's mind, so it would be something that people can relate to. So, yeah.
Okay. In the city of Boston, where I live, and I have two sons who live in New York City, and they told me the same thing that's been going on there. The city, using the schools in New York City and using the schools and I think some other organizations in Boston, is providing food for free to anybody who needs it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a couple of interesting points about this. One, these are wildly popular programs. The general public completely supports this. Now, the idea of providing things for free to just anybody in ordinary times meets with very understandable objections from people who tend to be in the conservative category.
Right. They would call it handouts and freeloaders and those types of things.
Exactly. Many people, including myself, do not think that people who contribute reasonably according to ability have any moral obligation to hand over the fruits of their labor to people who refuse to contribute reasonably according to ability. In other words, who could indeed contribute, are healthy people of an age where it would be expected, but who simply refuse, in other words, freeloaders, like you said. I don't think that those freeloaders have any moral right to anything from the people who contribute reasonably according to ability. And so in ordinary times, any program which is based on the idea that even freeloaders have a right to something that's paid for with the taxes of people who are working, a lot of people understandably object to that. But what's different about the current situation with the COVID-19 is that the general public, including these conservatives, understand that there are enormous numbers of people now who do contribute reasonably according to ability, who were working before they were laid off as a result of the virus, and the stay-at-home policies and so forth.
Right.
And they understand that these people, that the vast majority of people now who are hard up for, because they've lost their income and can't pay for food, rent, and so forth, that these are people who are contributing reasonably according to ability. It's just that their ability to contribute has been made zero by forces beyond their control. And so they have no objection to these people being given food or to have their rent canceled, which is what's happening in certain places, or at least deferred, and so forth. There's enormous public support for these programs. And the reason there's public support for them is because these programs are implicitly based on the egalitarian principle of from each according to reasonable ability to each according to need or reasonable desire, with scarce things equitably rationed according to need. So in other words, what I'm saying is that although people almost never hear that principle articulated explicitly because the ruling class doesn't want people to hear it, the fact is that principle that most people think is morally just. And it's because they think that's a morally just principle that they support these free food programs now. And this is an indication of the fact that the vast majority of the general public that wants society to be shaped by egalitarian values. They just, for the most part, have never heard these values stated explicitly, and so they have trouble themselves stating them explicitly, and that, of course, makes any movement for that goal weaker and so forth. But the vast majority would love for society to be shaped totally by those values.
Yeah, I agree, John. And, that's what I kind of started saying earlier about I was unfamiliar with the definition of the term. I'd heard it. You were the one that kind of, made me look it up more. And when you do, the definition of egalitarianism is essentially a kind of a moral code, so to speak. It's, saying, like you said, each according, to ability, to desire, to need. And that's what does separate it from all the other isms, you socialism, capitalism. And you point this out on PDR Boston when under, what is egalitarianism, you state right there at the beginning, essentially, no, it's not socialism, it's not capitalism. And you explain the differences. And the difference is that all those deal with money. They all deal with an elite, a hierarchy with different classes of people. And that is it. That is the, social degradation, of society is the social classes and the inequality. And I know what you mean also about egalitarianism, just try to sum it up here that, a lot of times when you talk about stuff, and I do the same, egalitarianism or like a resource-based economy or, everything being free, those types of things. People start thinking immediately about, handing like handouts and freeloaders and stuff. But there's ways around that. And, you point all that out in your writings. But you're right, John. Most people, the way the system is, the way capitalism is, the way the competitiveness is of everything, it pits people against each other so much that I think clouds people's common sense, basically. It clouds their normal, rational judgment. Like you pointed out now with the COVID thing, because of the situation changing, now all of a sudden, all these people who maybe were against it before, like, let's give these people food because there's nothing they can do. What can they do? Whereas if it was months before the COVID and somebody was homeless and starving to death, or, they just lost their job, or, those people would have a different outlook. But that was because they were being clouded by the competitive capitalist system.
Well, you're right. The ruling class has to prevent people from having an explicitly egalitarian goal. And so it is constantly framing questions, social issues, in which basically it's choose your poison. You can choose terrible option A or terrible option B. And they've designed, this is what my book Divide and Rule is about in detail.
Okay.
The ruling class frames a host of social issues in terms to be, choose your poison instead of making it possible for people to choose what they want, actually, in which case, more than 90% or so would be in one camp and the ruling class would be in the other camp. They can't let that happen. I can discuss this with respect to same-sex marriage, abortion, immigration. All these social issues, the ruling class censors points of view which would unify the vast majority of the public.
Yeah,
they're censored.
That's very important, John. What you just said. We kind of touched on this last show too, or the first one, but it's not even so much what is said, which is pretty much garbage and twisted truths and agendas, but it's what is not said is just as or sometimes more important. The opinions that are censored, and that is what gives the general public the notion that a lot of other people don't feel that way, and because they feel like, well, if it did, they'd talk about it or it would be said, or, kind of like we also said on the last show, for example, if you turn on the news and they're talking, a politician or a reporter or anybody is talking about, one of these insanely rich people, Bezos or Gates or whatever, and, we need to tax the super rich a little more. And then the discussion goes down that road of, well, what do we tax and how much do we tax them? But the real question that nobody you're never going to hear on the media is, what kind of system is this that allows this person, one person, to have more wealth than almost half of the world? And so it's what they don't say, of course, that's so important.
Yeah. Now, one of the effects of this divide and rule framing of social issues is that it results in each it creates camps. Typically the progressive camp and the conservative camp, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who disagree about the issue, and each of those camps is approximately 50% of the population. And so what it does is that it convinces everybody that about half the population is the problem, the other half, the half that's not in the camp they're in. And people who think that half the population is the problem, the enemy. Well, you can't be forgiving in democracy. You can't seriously think that you want to have a movement for real democracy, with the vast majority of people really being in charge, if you think that a good 50% of the population wants to make society exactly the wrong way, an oppressive, evil, stupid, way. And that creates the enormous pessimism that prevails today about making a better society. People, have sort of been persuaded that the genuine democracy would make it even worse. And this is done deliberately. The conclusion I draw from this analysis is that the chief task for egalitarian revolutionaries today is to do things that enable the general public to discover the truth about the general public,
right,
which is that the vast majority want an egalitarian revolution. That is the big secret that the ruling class has to maintain to stay in power. Once people know that they are in the vast majority in wanting to remove the rich from power, to have real, not fake democracy with no rich and no poor, then they will stop feeling hopeless about the possibility of making that happen, which is how they feel today, and they will have the hopefulness to have the confidence to start doing the things to make it happen, to creating egalitarian revolutionary organizations and building a mass movement that can ultimately be so large and strong and determined that the members of the military forces, who also want an egalitarian revolution as much as the civilians, because, they're ordinary people, it will, for the first time, when they see a very large and determined egalitarian revolutionary movement, they will see that if they refuse orders to attack it and go over to the side of that revolutionary movement, they will be going over to the side that will very likely be the winning side. And so they will not end up being executed as a traitor for refusing orders. But until there's a large enough movement to make them, see that, even though members of the military want an egalitarian revolution as much as anybody else, after all, they didn't enlist in the military to keep the rich in power,
mm-hmm,
and other reasons. They're going to obey orders to attack the movement if they don't want to, be severely disciplined, possibly even shot as a traitor. And so the way to remove the rich from power is to build the egalitarian revolutionary movement large enough so that it will actually get the support of the critical mass of members of the military, and that's how the rich lose power, when they lose that critical mass of military forces to obey their orders. But in order to build that movement, we have to figure out ways to let the general public see that they're actually the majority in running an egalitarian revolution, and that requires a lot of ingenuity and, doing things with different tactics to to accomplish that. Some of them I've been trying to do with some success, but, it takes time.
Yeah.
That's what I've been doing, my personal efforts in Boston.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we're going to get to now. I just wanted to say before that what you were just pointing out is something I think you said on the last show, but I've heard you say before, and it stuck with me. I think it's very important. It's as seemingly simple as it sounds. Military, when you're talking about a true revolution and standing up to the powers that be who have control of these forces, these lethal killing machines, police, military, that obviously is a huge consideration and deterrent for a lot of people and whatnot. But something you said that I think it's important to think about. You said the military are trained to defend, in this case, the United States, Americans essentially. And the police are trained and taught to defend the law, period. And I think that's a very interesting distinction because, if you've seen it all throughout history of different instances, but, if you're having some type of uprising, nonviolent, obviously violent, they have to do something to suppress it or calm it down. But, any type of uprising, police will just enforce indiscriminately because they're trained law, this is against the law. But if it's Americans standing up to the government in America, and when you're talking military, there are going to be a lot less likely to take any force against them because that's who they're trained to protect. And I just think that's a very interesting distinction to think about and realize. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, you're right. That's an important point. It's not to say that, obviously, people in the police force are individuals and, they don't all behave exactly the same and so forth. But on average or overall, what you said is true. The police are trained to view themselves as agents of law and order, protecting the law.
Right.
And they're trained to use violence with a credible threat of violence against people merely because they're not obeying the law.
Right.
Whereas soldiers are told that their role is to protect the American people from foreign enemies. And if there's no foreign enemy, they don't have any ideological training that would say that there's any good reason why they should be attacking Americans with violence.
Exactly.
It's different. An example of the problem that the ruling class has in this regard is in 1968, during the huge general strike in France, the President de Gaulle of France went to Germany and was believed to be making arrangements for German troops to be used against the general striking working class in France because he knew that it was likely that the French soldiers would not obey orders to attack French working class. So that this of course is a reason we need an international movement. We need an egalitarian revolutionary movement around the world because the ruling classes of all the different nations, however much they may have conflicts, are fundamentally united when it comes to preventing egalitarian revolution anywhere.
Exactly.
And they would rely on foreign troops to put down a revolution, in the United States, for example, and those foreign troops would be used unless the foreign government worried that sending those foreign troops to the United States would provoke a greater revolutionary upheaval in their own country. That's the power we have if we have an international movement. But anyway, the point you were making about the difference between the police and the soldiers was evident in what happened in Russia in 1917 when the Tsar was in power. In the first revolution, not the Bolshevik October Revolution, but the earlier February Revolution, which forced the Tsar to abdicate, there were two forces the Tsar had. One is he had military forces composed largely of Cossack soldiers on horseback, and they were the superior military force. They also had police forces. Well, there were huge working class demonstrations against the Tsar in St. Petersburg, and after about a week or so, the Cossack horse-mounted soldiers became sympathetic to the workers protesting, and eventually so sympathetic that they, refused to attack them when given orders. Initially they pretended to attack them. They would ride their horses through the crowd, making sure people could just step out of the way and stuff like that. And eventually, the only people who were attacking the workers were police. But then the Cossack soldiers started attacking the police if they attacked the workers, and as a result, the police just took off their uniforms and blended into the civilian crowd. And that was part of the events that quickly led the Tsar to realize he had to abdicate.
Yeah, there's nothing like that, is it? I saw a video of Yellow Vest a while back, and there was cops standing there in a little line, and the Yellow Vests were just, chanting, singing, whatever, and the cops they just all started taking off their helmets and some of their gear, and essentially they were trying to express through that they were with them. It was really touching video, and there's nothing like it. I mean, because that's, like you said earlier, John, everybody basically wants the same thing. I mean, it's just that in a strange way, a lot of people almost don't realize that, because of all the different reasons. But when you see stuff like that, people who are supposedly divided in any way, shape, or form, and they come together like that, it's really inspiring. And I agree, though, that, like I said, I'm in these conversations a lot, and on one hand, it seems so monumental to get the change that we're all kind of advocating for. Sort of like, well, what's the next? How would you go about that? What's the next step? I do think ultimately, in my opinion, I agree with what you just said a minute ago, that you have to convince enough people that we're going for the same thing, that we're on the same side, that I totally disagree with you with a lot of things. You totally disagree with me with a lot of things. That's fine. But we want ultimately the same thing. Because you have to, unless you're in a position of power and you can just say, hey, I'm going to change these things because I am the authority. Well, yeah, you don't need a lot of, support and people with you. But in our case, being the people, that's essentially about the only way it's going to happen, is to get more and more people turning the tide. And you, like you said, John, that's what you do other than all your writings and stuff. You have done that in more than one way. And I want to talk a little about one of the ways you did it that was, again, very inspiring to me. Well, last time you were on the show, it was last March, and you had started in February. And at that point already, you had 444 signatures. The BAC organization, BACC, the Brighton Austin Community Coalition, they were supposedly formed and organized about gentrification that was taking place there in Boston, where you live, which anyone who doesn't know, gentrification is essentially just where the rich say, okay, you know what, we're going to build a bunch of these luxury homes or high rise or whatever the case. It drives up rent. It drives up taxes. We push the peasants out, and all that good stuff. That's essentially what gentrification is. And that's what that organization was started for. But you went a step further. You saw an opportunity there, and you came up with a statement, and you went out on the street, and you were getting people to sign the statement, essentially saying that they would join the BAC if the larger goal was to totally remove the rich from power, have real, not fake democracy, the stuff you say, and true affordable housing for everyone, not the joke 20% or whatever they say is acceptable. But you started that in February, and in 3 months, in May, you had 444 on the last show. Like I said, you were going for 1,000. I said last show, I have no doubt you're going to get 1,000. You ended up getting 1,021 signatures. And
that's right.
That is just great. That was really great. So tell me a little about that.
Okay, well, here's the story. Yes, gentrification is a big issue in my neighborhood of Brighton and Allston in Boston. Brighton is one zip code and Allston is an adjacent zip code in the city of Boston, and the two zip codes together are commonly referred to as one of the Boston neighborhoods, referred to as Allston-Brighton usually, sometimes Brighton-Allston. There's a total of about 70-something thousand people who live in Allston-Brighton. So, as is well known among the people of Allston-Brighton, luxury housing, new developments of luxury housing are going up, springing up like mushrooms, and people many times who are in families that have lived in this neighborhood for many generations are having to leave because they can no longer pay the rising rents, or in some cases the rising property taxes, even if they own their home, because the rents and property taxes are going up because of the shift to luxury housing instead of affordable housing. And a lot of people are very, very angry at this, and a lot of them are familiar with the word gentrification, although not all of them, but almost everyone knows that the problem is this lack of affordable housing. So a few years ago, a new organization formed in this neighborhood called the Brighton Allston Community Coalition. It was formed by some, neighborhood activist types.
Fake activists.
And, well, you're jumping ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right. Go ahead.
But they formed this new organization, the BACC, Brighton Allston Community Coalition, and they had their first public meeting that I went to, and I didn't know anything about them other than, they formed this new organization that they said its goal was to get more affordable housing built and to unite everyone in the neighborhood, be they a student, because there's a lot of students because of the universities here, Boston University and Harvard are here, and Boston College. So there's a lot of students who live here.
Right. Okay.
It was for uniting students and homeowners and renters all together to fight for improvements. Top of the list being more affordable housing. So I went to the first meeting, and it was in a church, and there was about maybe 100 people or so, and I was enthusiastic about it. I joined the meeting and volunteered, did volunteer work for it to get some members and so forth. And then I decided that what I'm going to do is to write my own membership statement application and collect numbers to the BACC by using it. And I even told the chair and vice chair of the BACC what I had written and how I was going to use it to collect numbers, and they said, fine, just please give them a copy of the BACC's mission statement. They joined, and I said, sure, and I did. And I'm sure they thought, by the way, at this time there were fewer than 500 members in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sure that they thought that, maybe I'd collect another 10 or 15 members and that would be fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here's the statement that I wrote and that I went onto the street to ask people to sign. The title of the statement is No Rich and No Poor. And the statement reads, quote, "We, the undersigned, joined, or are hereby joining, the Brighton Allston Community Coalition, BACC, because its goals, including adequate, affordable housing and good public transportation, and the end to gentrification, are part of our larger goal, removing the rich from power to have real, not fake, democracy, with no rich and no poor, period. We hope that the BACC will declare that it also aims for this larger goal, semicolon. That would make us be even more enthusiastic members of it, period, end of statement." Well, as you said earlier, I did in fact collect 1,021 members of the BACC with this statement. And I brought the signed statements to the vice chair, and I think her jaw dropped to the floor when she saw that there were not 10 or 15, but 1,021 new members. So I had more than tripled the size of the organization with people who were saying explicitly that they hope the BACC will declare that it also has this larger goal, meaning removing the rich from power, a real not fake democracy with no rich and no poor. And so what I have done is created a situation where 2/3 of the members of the BACC were saying explicitly with their signature on a statement, which also had to include their address where they lived.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of more than 400 of them, their email address, and in many cases their telephone number. The vast majority now of the members of the organization were saying that they wanted it to be a revolutionary, egalitarian organization. So it wasn't just me saying I wanted the organization to become an egalitarian revolutionary organization. It was 2/3 of the members of the organization saying it.
Yeah.
Well, I was a little naive. I thought, at the very least, the leaders of the organization would allow people to discuss this goal on the Google, email group that the organization had for internal discussion. Well, I was wrong. The leaders absolutely prohibited any even hint at the idea of no rich and no poor. I was blocked from posting anything that even hinted at that goal on the email group. And I was told that I would be blocked. I mean, there's no question about it. I was told not only verbally, but an email sent to me that I would be blocked. And I protested, and I exposed what the leaders of the BACC were doing by writing about it on some other neighborhood email groups and so forth, but they persisted. And that's when I, came to realize that that the organization was controlled. These leaders are upper middle class people. I don't have anything against upper middle class people. I suppose I am one myself. I was a senior research scientist at the Harvard School of Public Health, and I'm a professional. I guess that makes me an upper middle class person. So I don't have any objection to people who are upper middle class people. But the fact of the matter is that the upper middle class people who take charge of community organizations almost invariably they're the kind of people who are opposed to those organizations even hinting at wanting an egalitarian revolution. And the reason they're opposed to it is because they think the way upper middle class people tend to think, which is this. When you're an upper middle class person, like, for example, the chair of the BACC is a professor at Suffolk University in journalism, and the vice chair is a lawyer who specializes in business litigation. Now, when you have jobs like that, when you do your job as a professional, you tend to get respected for doing your job well. If you're a good lawyer, you get respected for being a good lawyer, typically, right? And if you're a professor, you get respected, from the university for being, a good professor. And so these people are used to being respected when they behave in what they would describe as a respectful,
an appropriate manner.
Appropriate manner.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you go around saying that the president of the college should be, put in jail, for no particular reason, or if you say the rich should be removed from power, and then you try to have a good session, what do they call those private sessions between the lawyer and the judge? I forget what they call those things. You know what I mean? If you're saying that let's remove the rich from power, you don't expect to have much influence on the judge, in that kind of situation. So these people think that the way to get something, the way to to have your proposal for some policy at the university, or the way to get a decent ruling from the judge, is by being very, very non-challenging to the status quo. And so as a result, when they're the leaders of a community organization, they think that the way to get some improvement is to gain credibility. They use the word credibility. And the way you gain credibility with the rich and powerful is by behaving very, very respectfully. You never, never, never say something like, you want to remove the rich from power. You always pretend to believe that we live in a real democracy,
right?
And even though that's not true, you definitely pretend to believe it, and so forth. And so that's why these people are so deadly opposed to any organization that they control becoming an egalitarian revolutionary organization, even though it's only the fear of egalitarian revolution that makes the ruling class ever grant any substantive reform.
Yes.
I mean, the reason FDR had to grant the reforms of the New Deal, including famously Social Security and unemployment compensation, and the reason he was able to persuade his fellow upper-class rulers of the need to do that was because there was a revolutionary movement going in the United States, which was forcing him to send military forces with shoot-to-kill orders against American workers, and things were getting out of control. The upper-class newspapers, the New York Times and the LA Times, were declaring that it was a revolution in the making, and they were right, and that's why he had to grant the New Deal. It wasn't because he was this, kind man who, felt sorry for people. He had just been ordering shoot-to-kill orders against them. So, but the thing is, he knew he had to do something to calm the waters of the revolutionary movement, and that was the New Deal. Well, the upper-class people who control community organizations like the BACC, they don't want to acknowledge this fact because they do not want to be associated with anything that even smells of being egalitarian revolutionary, because they don't want to be seen by the powers that be as being, unprofessional, as it were.
Yeah, so like so many other organizations, they're fake. I mean, that's what it boils down to. They're not really for equality. They're not for true, people or organizations or whatever that are really going to truly fight and push for fundamental systematic change.
Yeah, here's the thing. These upper middle class leaders, they're the minority in the population of my neighborhood and most neighborhoods. And the reason that I could get 1,021 fingers, just me alone, standing on the street for this egalitarian revolutionary statement, is because most people I asked signed it. So the upper middle class people act as if they were the majority, but they're not. They're the minority, and unfortunately, the working class people who are the majority, unfortunately, until we let them see that they're the majority, they act as if they were a tiny minority. Well, so we have this inversion of the truth,
Exactly, and that goes back to what we were saying because one, a lot of people don't see it and it's not talked about, but that's how the true minority, the real upper class, real highly upper class and elite, it's that this is how things are, period. Things are okay like this, period. We just have to change a few things, That's the narrative they try and project, but we know things aren't okay. We know it's an unfair and rigged system. And on that note, we're going to conclude this episode. Hope you'll tune in next week to part 2 of my discussion with John, and we'll discuss strategic thinking to raise awareness, how to turn pessimism to optimism, some Karl Marx truth, and a lot more. As always, I want to thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I really hope you got something out of it. That's what this is all about for me, trying to inform, educate, and inspire people. The sooner people realize the veil of lies we bought into, and that we already possess all the knowledge and technology we need for sustainability and abundance for everyone, the sooner the transition can start. Please feel free to email, follow, share, comment, like, subscribe. I welcome any and all feedback or support. And I hope you'll tune in next time for another episode of the All Real Show.